Disciple Up number 143, the top countries where it's hardest to be a Christian. This is Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast where psychology, science, the real world, sin, self, and culture meet head on, and Scripture rules. If you're a follower of Christ looking to grow or looking for some biblical answers, then get ready, because it's time to Disciple Up. Hey everybody, welcome back to Disciple Up, or if this is your first time tuning in or watching on YouTube, I'll get to that in a moment. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Louie. I'm your host for the show. I'm going to fiddle with the mic. It's kind of a tradition, which I do this all the time, and I know I should get it done before the podcast, but then I want to tweak it because I'm just that way. Okay. Today's an unusual, actually a first time we've ever done this edition of the podcast. I'm going to be recording this for the audio podcast, but there's also a video version that is going forth, and it will be on a YouTube page. Now, our Disciple Up YouTube page. There's actually two YouTube pages for Disciple Up. One's called the Disciple Up Podcast, which simply has the audio of the regular audio podcast. But for this podcast, since I'm going to be talking about numbers and percentages, and that's very hard to just kind of hear, if you want to actually see this, I'm actually going, right now, I am videoing I'm videoing the page that we're going to be talking about, because we're talking about an article in Christianity Today. It's at ChristianityToday.com. There's a link to this page in the show notes where this new study's been released for 2019 or 2020. Well, it's data from 2019, since there's kind of hardly any data for this year. And we're going to go through it and talk about it and discuss some of the implications of it, because I think this is important for Christians worldwide, wherever you live, to be aware of, certainly for prayer purposes, if nothing else, because we want to be praying for and holding up our brothers and sisters who are in places where it's very difficult to be a believer. And so to help you do that, I'm actually going to video it, and you can actually see it. There is a link, of course, in the show notes at discipleup.org to the page itself. You can just go and read the article yourself if you want to look at it, or, copy it or do whatever you want to do with it. So that will be available to you as well. So let's jump in here and talk about this a little bit. Because this article, besides all the facts and the figures that it gives you, it also really does something very interesting. The way they've done this study will help us, I think about persecution in a broader context, a more multifaceted way, and I think that is really good. So the article's in the news section at CT. It's called The Top 50 Countries Where It's Hardest to Be a Christian. Martyrdom drops in Nigeria, but soars, I think, in Burkina Faso, while China brings 16 million more Christians onto Open Doors 2020 World Watch List of Christian Persecution. This is a January 15th article. I'm recording this on January 20th, and it is written by Jason Casper. So here we go. Here's some sad and, I think, startling statistics. Every day, 8 Christians worldwide are killed for their faith, because of their faith. Every day, 8 Christians worldwide are killed because of their faith. Every week, 182 churches or Christian buildings are attacked. Now, of course, we know by Christian buildings, he means buildings that are used for ministries or, Christian organizations that have hospitals or libraries or schools or Bible colleges. He doesn't actually mean the buildings themselves are saved and going to heaven, of course. So we got that. Okay. And every month, 309 Christians are imprisoned unjustly. So there you go. 8 Christians killed every day. 182 churches or buildings attacked every week, and 309 Christians are imprisoned unjustly, obviously because of their faith. So reports the 2020 World Watch List, the WWL, the latest annual accounting from Open Doors of the top 50 countries where Christians are the most persecuted for their faith. We cannot let this stand, said David Curry, president and CEO of Open Doors USA, during the 2020 list's unveiling in Washington, D.C. People are speaking out, and we have an obligation to hear their cry, he said. The listed nations comprise 260 million Christians suffering high to severe levels of persecution. That's up from 245 million in last year's list. Another 50 million could be added from the 23 nations that fall just outside the top 50, nations such as Mexico, Chad, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for a ratio of 1 in 8 Christians worldwide facing persecution. Last year, 40 nations scored high enough to register very high persecution levels. This year, it's reached 45. Open Doors has monitored Christian persecution worldwide since 1992. North Korea has ranked number 1 since 2002 when the watch list began. Now here's the list where it's hardest to follow Jesus. Number 1, North Korea. No surprise. Number 2, Afghanistan. No surprise. Number 3, Somalia. Number 4, Libya. Number 5, Pakistan. Number 6, Eritrea. Number 7, Sudan. Number 8, Yemen. Number 9, Iran. Number 10, India. Now, aside from number 1 and number 10, the other 8 nations that make up this list are all Muslim-majority countries. India, of course, has split between Hindus and Muslims, and unfortunately in recent years, Hindus have become very, not all of them, of course, but there is a very militant kind of movement among many of the Hindus in India, and that's led to fighting between Muslims and Hindus. That's also led to more Christian persecution. So that's your top 10 list there. And that's a pretty sad thing. Last year, CT noted Asia rising as India entered the top 10 for the first time, while China rose from number 43 to number 47. That trend now continues as 2 in 5 Asian Christians now face high levels of persecution, up from 1 in 3 during the previous reporting period. China's crackdown on both state-sanctioned and underground churches and its growing surveillance network added 16 million people to Open Doors' tally of Christians facing persecution. Quote, the Chinese government is committing unparalleled human rights crimes against Christian citizens, not only Christian citizens, but certainly Christians are up there, but there's the Uyghurs and there's other Muslim groups as well that they're giving a hard time. But, of course, this study is just about Christians. But we're not saying, by the way, here that just means that everybody else is fine, because obviously they're not, especially in China. Let me just start over again there. The Chinese government, is committing unparalleled human rights crimes against Christian citizens and seeking to wipe religious sentiment from its country, stated Curry in a press release. Yet, as the Chinese Christians who will join me will testify, he obviously had some people at the press release briefing thing, the persecution Christians face, including extensive surveillance, raids on churches, and imprisonment, have not succeeded in eliminating Christianity. Instead, the underground Christian community has banded together and is actively working to call the world's attention to the plight of the Chinese people. We will join them in that call, he said. At the D.C. rollout, Curry was joined by Chinese pastor, and again, now I have to say, I'm going to probably miss the pronunciation of many of these names up, so please forgive me. Zhu, that's Jianzhu, Zhanzhu or something like that. The persecution of Christians is the worst I have seen since 1979, he said. Christians have a worldwide brotherhood, and the government sees this as a threat. Now, that is no surprise if you've been following what goes on in China. The Western media has, for the most part, inexplicably just tried to ignore and play down what's happening in China. But it's not just happening to Christians. The Chinese government is really using modern technology, face recognition software, all kinds of things to create a very formidable state control. And their goal is to control every single person in China, which, given the population, is pretty frightening. It is time for religious persecution to stop once and for all, said Robert Destro, Assistant Secretary of State in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. But as we all know, that is a long-term proposition. The point of the annual WWL rankings, which have chronicled how North Korea now has competition as persecution only gets worse and worse, is to aim for more effective anger while showing persecuted believers that they are not forgotten. And when he says anger there, obviously we're trying to get people riled up in the free world and even other places to raise enough of a stink so that our governments will put some pressure on them so that they'll back off. Is that happening? Well, that doesn't seem to be happening that much. This year, the top 10 is relatively unchanged. After North Korea is Afghanistan, number 2, followed by Somalia, Libya, Pakistan, and I read those all to you before. Open Doors tracks persecution across 6 categories, including both social and governmental pressure on individuals and congregations, and has a special focus on women. Now, if you've got the video to this, you will be able to see this map here. If you don't, then, of course, you can't because, audio doesn't do video well. That's why it's called audio. But, hold on. I'm trying to do something with my mouse here, and I'm failing. Here we go. There we go. If you look at this world map Open Doors has, in the Western Hemisphere, there's one country. Everything else that they've got listed here, from extreme to very high to high levels of persecution for Christians, they're all in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. So there's one in South America, and the rest are in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. So Western Europe, nothing's listed. United States, Canada, Mexico isn't listed on this particular map. This is the World Watch list. However, notice what I read there when I said Open Doors tracks persecution across 6 categories. Now, I think when you say persecution to somebody, anybody, doesn't have to be a Christian person, just anybody, average person on the street, whatever, they're going to think of people being, beaten or killed or thrown in jail. But that's not the only kinds of persecution that Open Doors is trying to track here. Notice what they say. 6 categories. That includes both social and government pressure on people, on individuals, families, and congregations, and it has a special focus on women. So if we just isolate violence, the most common thought, when you think of persecution, of course, I think Christians think of the early Christians being crucified and thrown to the lions and burned at the stake and that kind of stuff, which is obviously real persecution, but it's not the only kind. And that's what I want you to think about today, is the fact that persecution has a much broader context than we usually give it. But when you just look at violence, the top 10 list shifts. And out of the top 10 that I just named you, only Pakistan and India remain. Here's the top 10 list of countries where Christians face the most violence. Number 1 is Pakistan. Number 2 is Nigeria. Number 3 is Egypt. Number 4 is the Central African Republic. Number 5, Burkina Faso. Number 6, Colombia. There's our entry into the Western Hemisphere. Number 7, Cameroon. Number 8, India. Number 9, Mali. And number 10, Sri Lanka. And that's judged from a period of November 2018 through October 2019. 5 of the most violent countries for Christians are located in the Sahel, a horizontal belt of semi-arid grazing areas and farmlands located between the Sahara Desert and the African savanna. Obviously, that is an area that is dominated by Islam. Militant Islamic rebel groups and terrorists have proliferated in the Sahel or the Sahel, I think it's Sahel, S-A-H-E-L, for those of you listening to the audio of this. The Sahel in recent years. Conflict between Muslim herders and Christian farmers has also resulted in violence. And weakened government structures leave the population vulnerable. That's another thing most of these countries have in common. Not all of them, but most of them, like Burkina Faso, maybe Colombia. Certainly when you're in the Central African Republic, it's not like they have a huge police force, right? I mean, there's a lot of justice in these countries being meted out at the village level in the traditional ways. And if you're in a Muslim-dominated area, you're going to face Muslim justice. Nigeria, where Africa's largest Christian population, has no cheeks left to turn, ranked number 12 overall, but is second behind only Pakistan in terms of violence, and ranks number 1 in the number of Christians killed for reasons related to their faith. Open Doors tallied 1,350 Nigerian martyrs in its 2020 list. So, 1,350 Nigerians were killed, let's just say roughly in the calendar year of 2019. Here's the list of most Christians martyred. And this, again, runs from November 2018 to October 2019. Number 1 is Nigeria, 1,350. Number 2 is the Central African Republic, 924. Number 3 is Sri Lanka with 200. Number 4 is the Democratic Republic of Congo with 152. Number 5, the South Sudan with 100. Number 6, Burkina Faso with 50. Number 7, Egypt. They have 23. Number 8, 20. Number 9, this seems very strange to me, but there's a bracket. It says name withheld, close bracket, 20. I don't get it. I don't understand why they wouldn't put the name of the country there. I don't know. Maybe there's only one person in the country that's reporting this and they'll get outed and killed or arrested. I don't know. But anyway, so the country with no name. And then number 10, Colombia, here in the Western Hemisphere, was 16. Now, that's just terrible when you look at that list and all of these people who were killed simply because they were Christians. Sri Lanka rose 16 spots from number 46 last year, primarily due to the Easter suicide bombings, you probably remember that, which killed over 250 people at Catholic and Protestant churches and hotels. But the year's largest and most dramatic jump was in Burkina Faso, which jumped 33 slots after not even qualifying for the top 50 last year. It would have been number 61. Dozens of Burkina priests and pastors have been kidnapped or killed. Over 200 churches have been forced to close. The United Nations estimates 500,000 people, 500,000, have been displaced from their homes. The African Center for Strategic Studies calculates that extremist attacks have quadrupled since 2017, and deaths from violence increased 60% in 2019. Open Doors counted 50 Christians among that number. And of course, that number could be higher because nobody has, exact figures on these kind of things precisely, but they're doing the best they can to report it. And Open Doors is, I think, considered the authority on these kind of things because they've been working on it for a long time and they're very focused on it and they do a great job. Meanwhile, a transition in Nigeria from village raids to kidnapping by militant Muslim Fulani herdsmen, whose attacks were 6 times as deadly as Boko Haram's, according to the International Crisis Group. That says something there, because you've heard of Boko Haram and all the horrible terrorist activities they've been doing the last couple of years. Well, these guys, these Muslim Fulani herdsmen, are 6 times as deadly as Boko Haram. That's pretty bad, guys. Resulted in an overall decrease in Christians killed in the Sahel as well as worldwide. Due to this shift in tactics, worldwide martyrdoms fell, so we're down a little bit, 2,983 in the 2020 report. That's down from 4,305 the year before. Open Doors is noted for favoring a more conservative estimate than other groups, who often tally martyrdoms at 100,000 a year. Yeah, that's certainly a huge difference between 100,000 and 4,300, or 3,000. And like I say, trying to get exact figures on all this stuff, who knows? But it gives us a framework to understand and discuss this. And I think following the more conservative numbers is good, because the one thing you don't want to do is be hysterical and panicked and freaked out about this. As Christians, death and martyrdom should not do that to us. And if it is doing it to us, then we need to take a good hard look at ourselves. On the other hand, obviously we are concerned with this. We want to do something about this. We should be outraged with this terrible behavior, but it shouldn't scare us. If it scares us, then that just shows us we have some work to do in our personal spiritual growth. Abduction of Christians is a new category tracked by Open Doors in this year's report, with 1,052 tallied worldwide. Nigeria tops the list with 224. Nigeria also leads the newly tracked categories of forced marriages. That is a reality, particularly in the Muslim world, and obviously is a terrible thing. Accounting for 130. Nigeria also leads the newly tracked category of forced marriages, accounting for 130 out of 630 worldwide. Attacked Christian homes, 1,500 out of 3,315, and looted Christian shops, 1,000 out of 1,979. So they're really digging in here and trying to show people what's happening, because there's a lot of places where they won't attack. They might not attack you personally. They might not attack your church. They might, but if you have a Christian store, they'll attack that. They'll mark that. They'll steal from you, smash your windows, grab, run. Kind of reminds you of what the Nazis did in Germany with the Jewish businesses before they really cracked down, when they had to wear the Star of David and everybody knew about it, and if you frequented a store like that, you weren't Jewish, they were liable to give you a really hard time. That's the kind of thing also that needs to be tracked, because that is persecution. Other new categories return the focus to Asia. Of the 70 nations where Christians are raped or sexually harassed, 4 are recipients of migrant workers in the Arabian Peninsula. Saudi Arabia, which is number 13, Qatar, number 27, and Kuwait, number 43. And the United Arab Emirates at 47. Nigeria is 8th. Worldwide, there were 8,537 recorded cases, but Open Doors warns that this tally is just the tip of the iceberg, as many assaults occur in private and are not reported. India ranks first in the new category of physical or mental abuse, which includes beatings and death threats. The continuing rise in the subcontinent of a militant Hindu nationalism contributed to 1,445 of the reported 14,645 cases worldwide. China is the chief violator in Open Doors' other 2 previously tracked categories. Beijing has jailed or detained without charge 1,147 Christians for faith-related reasons, out of a total of 3,711 worldwide. And that number rose from 3,150 last year. All right, now, before we go on, I want to look at this again. If you're watching the video, you can see this. If you can't, you won't. But they actually have a chart, a map here with lists on it of most severe persecution, most violent persecution, and here we go. We'll zoom in on. Oh, that's much better. And obviously, as we said before, Pakistan's the most violent, but persecution in North Korea is the most severe. So that's what I wanted to sort of think about for a minute. What's the difference between severe and violent? Well, severe could be just something that's sort of all-pervasive. In North Korea, of course, there's no escape from the propaganda, right? It's just everywhere, all the time, in everything. and you're constantly, everywhere you go, there's loudspeakers blaring stuff. Of course, it's on the radio, it's on the TV. I don't really know how much internet access they get, but if they do get any, I'm sure it's probably simply you're allowed to log on and go to North Korean sites and nowhere else or something. But everywhere, they're constantly pressuring you to conform, and Christians are bad, and you shouldn't believe, and you should, believe in the dear leader or whatever this guy's called, and blah, blah, blah. So there is a difference between severe and violent, because violence is clear. We're talking about physical violence here. And in terms of physical violence, the interesting thing is, of the top 13 countries, North Korea is not even on the list. It's it's not kind of weird. It is weird. I would never have expected that. I would have figured they'd be up there, but they're not. But they are the most severe persecutors. So these give you very different results, and it's a different way to look at persecution. Now, when you think about persecution, what do you think of? Well, I think, like I said a minute ago, I think most people think of people being stoned, people being burned at the stake, people being, put in jail, beat, killed in one way, shape, form, or another. Yet, if we actually look at what Jesus said, we might be surprised to find out that things could be a little different. For example, here's what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. He goes through all the Beatitudes that we love, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those that are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, pure in heart, all that. Then he gets down in Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 and 11, and he does something here he does not do with the rest of the Beatitudes. He repeats it with slight variation. He says in verse 10, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Okay. So, there you go. Then what comes to mind when you read that verse? Early Christians being, thrown to the lions and whatever. But then, look at verse 11 carefully. "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Blessed are you when others revile you, persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you. Well, here, Jesus seems to be equating persecution with verbal slander. People either attacking you because you believe, making up stories, lying about you, and all that. Well, now, isn't that interesting? That's probably not what you would first think of, is it? But if you add that into the mix of your understanding of persecution, then it does give you a very different perspective on how to look at persecution. Let's go on with the article. We'll come back to that in a minute. Attacks and foreclosures of churches have skyrocketed from 1,847 to 9,488, with China accounting for 5,576 of them. Gee. But now, this is an interesting list here. Angola was second with 2,000. Rwanda third with 700. Neither ranks among the top 50 persecution countries, although they're shutting down churches right and left, apparently. Angola would be 68, Rwanda 71. So here's the list. And this one struck home with me. And I'll show you why as we go through it. Where most churches were attacked or closed, again, this is November 2018, October 2019. China, number 1, with 5,576. Angola, number 2, with 2,000. Rwanda, number 3, with 700. Myanmar, 204. Nigeria, 150. Ethiopia, 124. Burundi, 100. Mali, 100. Pakistan, 58. Burkina Faso, 50. Myanmar is number 4. My Myanmar. Now, I say it's my Myanmar, not that I own it, not that I come from there, not that I am Burmese or Rawang or Chin or any of that, but because I have been going to Myanmar, as probably most of you know, almost every year since 2002. It's my first trip, and I love Myanmar. I love the people of Myanmar. And I know that churches have been in the past and continue to this day to be closed. Now, you might say, well, hold on there. Wait a second. I thought they democratized. I thought that they were, a democracy now and that people had freedom and blah, blah, blah. Well, yes, but no. By that, I mean, yeah, they're a lot freer than they used to be. They are not completely free. Buddhism is still the official religion of Myanmar. It is the state church, if you want to put it that way, the state religion. And I don't think that too many churches, high profile, kind of maybe churches in Yangon or something, would be closed. But I've heard in the last couple of years over there, even as they're democratized, even as they have free speech, and they can talk about politics all they want now, and there's no persecution there. But I've heard of churches being closed. I've heard of some pastors being arrested or moved to other places against their will, things like that happening. So it does happen. And in a 12-month period of time, 204 churches were closed in Myanmar. Now, you think, wow, it's not very many. Well, think about it. Myanmar is slightly smaller than the state of Texas. Okay? If you want to get a kind of a picture of size. Like the size of Germany, same thing, roughly. It doesn't have a lot of churches to start with because depending on who you ask, I've seen the low estimate of 95. Most people have it at 96, 97% of the country is Buddhist. And then you have Hindus and Muslims and, Christians and a few other people. But the vast, overwhelming majority of people in Myanmar are Buddhist to one degree or another. I'm not saying they're all, really believing this and actively practicing it, but that's what they are. So 204 churches is a lot of churches for Myanmar because there's not a lot of churches to begin with in most places in Myanmar. That's a huge blow to the Christian body of believers in Myanmar. It's huge. I mean, it really makes an impact. So when you think about this, it's not just the bare numbers that count. It's how many churches were there to start with? How big of an area is this? And then when you look at that, you begin to think, wow, that actually is kind of a scary number. Open Doors cautioned that in several nations, the above violations are very difficult to document precisely. Myanmar would certainly be one of those. In these cases, round numbers are presented, always leaning towards conservative estimates. Its research is certified and audited by the International Institute for Religious Freedom, a World Evangelical Alliance-backed network based in Germany. In the Middle East, Open Doors noted little change, with 4 of 5 Christians experiencing high levels of persecution. The main and continuing trend is the dwindling numbers of Christians from Syria and Iraq. Syria, this is amazing, Syria has lost 75% of its Christian population since the outbreak of civil war in 2011, down to 744,000 last year from an estimated 2.2 million before that. Iraq has lost 87% of its Christian population since the Gulf War in 2003, down to 202,000 last year from an estimated 1.5 million. Now, that's just, I don't even have words for that. That's horrific. And we heard a lot about this through the years, and especially with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, they really drove a lot of Christians out, the ones that they couldn't get their hands on to kill, of course. But that's just appalling. And it's so sad. And especially in Iraq. Iraq has, and Syria, 2 parts of Syria, have very old Christian presence. I mean, they have churches there that have been there for, 1,500 years, roughly, and now they're gone. And that's That's so sad. And it's something that's happened while we were watching our televisions and eating our popcorn or whatever. And I don't even know if most of us even noticed. Open Doors believes it is reasonable to call Christianity the world's most severely persecuted religion. At the same time, it notes there is no comparable documentation for the world's Muslim population. All nations of the world are monitored by its researchers and field staff, but in-depth attention is given to 100 nations and special focus on the 73 which record high levels of persecution. Scores of more than 40 on Open Doors' 100-point scale. The only good news, I have some good news for you people. The only good news in the 2020 watch list comes from Ethiopia, down at number 39, where recent reforms removed 2.5 million people from Open Doors' global total of Christians facing high levels of persecution. Despite increasing sectarian strife, as its Nobel Prize-winning evangelical president makes peace and attempts reforms, the Horn of Africa nation declined in rank from 28 to 39. Way to go, Ethiopia. Yeah. Open Doors also noted the positive case of Pakistan's Asia Bibi. In May 2019, the Christian mother of 5 was allowed to immigrate to Canada after the Supreme Court of Pakistan overturned her death penalty conviction for blasphemy. She had been in prison for 9 years. 9 years. The suffering of persecuted Christians cannot be recorded in statistics, stated Open Doors. Millions of people are found behind the numbers. Each one of them has their own story. This often includes deep suffering, but also courage and strong faith. And that's the report from Open Doors about persecution. Now, when I first started traveling overseas and teaching, I found it interesting that the Christians that I talked to in Myanmar and other places said they did not feel that they were persecuted, even though evangelism was, and I believe is still illegal in Myanmar. It certainly was. You couldn't really talk about your faith. Churches were very closely monitored and watched, and some were closed down. I had a friend who was a pastor, and he was actually, most of the Christians I know in Myanmar are, quote, tribal people, unquote. They're not Burmans or Burmese, but this guy was 100% Burmese, very proud of it, pastored a church in Yangon, and eventually they really clamped down on him, and then they closed him down, which really surprised me because the Burman tribe is the ruling tribe of Myanmar. It's the big one. So there are Christians there that these things happen to, and yet they said they don't feel that they're persecuted. I think looking at it from an American perspective, I would say, well, you look persecuted to me. So which is it? Well, that's where this report comes in handy, because this report breaks up the different types of persecution to help us think about the different kinds of persecution, and that all persecution is not equal. It's not all the same, right? And that's what's so important here. And so that's why I really, really like this, because it starts off with where it's hardest to follow Jesus. That's just sort of an overall lumping everything together kind of a list. And then, they come down here and they talk about the violence, and that's a whole different list, with Pakistan way up there. North Korea is not even on that list. That still boggles my mind a little bit. Then you look at where most Christians are martyred, and the list shifts again a bit with, Nigeria is number 2 on most violent, and number 1 where most Christians were killed. Pakistan is the number 1 in the list of where Christians face the most violence, but it's way down at number 8 for most killed. So in some nations like Nigeria, the violence would seem to be more intense and certainly more deadly than in Pakistan, where they may beat the holy heck out of you, but they're not likely to kill you. They killed 20, but and probably more than that, but that's the number. So it gives you a different way to look at it. And then when you think of the words of Jesus, who said, when they say when they lie about you, when they say bad things about you because you're a follower of mine. Okay, he called that persecution. So yeah, persecution in the broadest sense of the word is everywhere. Now, let's bring it home to Western civilization. I think that's considered a racist term now. I don't know. I don't really care. But let's talk about the United States, where I'm sure almost all my listeners are from, as well as, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Western type countries. Are we suffering persecution? Well, we're not suffering persecution like most of these people are. We're not being martyred. We're not being beat up very often. I'm sure it happens occasionally, but, not very often. The government is not closing churches. So you might say, well, no, in the United States and Canada and Australia and the UK and Europe. But there's a lot of pressure on Christians today. A lot of pressure when it comes to almost any form of sexual morality. There's a lot of pressure for us to abandon the historic Christian positions on these things. Whether it's, of course, there's been pressure for a long time on the whole heterosexual sex outside of marriage thing. I mean, for decades, people have thought I was some kind of a troglodyte because I believed in that you should not have sexual intercourse until you're married. I mean, what are you, some kind of a nut? But now, of course, today, it's homosexuality and it's transgenderism. And, it's coming. It's not quite here yet. It's not real popular, but you're starting to see it. You're going to get the whole, triad thing, and why not have more than one spouse thing. And on the fringes still, but coming. It will come. I guarantee you it's coming, folks. And that's going to be sex with animals. I'm telling you it's going to happen. I've said it before on this podcast. I've been saying it for years before I had a podcast, and I'm saying it again. It will happen. That's the social pressure to conform. And it's interesting to look at what happens with people under social pressure. And this really came home to me a couple years ago when my youth group had to get together. I was not able to go because I was busy, and they had it late Saturday night, and I work on Sundays. You may have heard that, being a pastor. So, I wasn't going to drive home and get home at 1 or 2 in the morning. That's just it's not happening. So I skipped it, but my sister went, and that was great. But so I'm in touch with a lot more of them, and I see their Facebook posts and all that. And I've also kind of gotten in touch with a couple of other people I went to Bible college with, and I see their posts. And it's fascinating how many of these people have wholesale abandoned the historic Christian positions on sexual morality. They're just totally on a different place and on a different side now. They think, and one of them on Facebook says that people that, accept gay and homosexual marriage and all of this stuff, they're real Christians. So I guess I'm not a real Christian. I would be interested to sit down with her and discuss this someday, but I don't think it would end well. But I'm not sure where she gets the authority to judge who's a real Christian. Part of what she said actually was real Christianity. Welcome to real Christianity, that's the quote, and who isn't. Because the only way I know to figure that out is the Bible. The whole Bible, taken in its context, properly interpreted, not tearing a few verses out of context like, God is love, and love is good. And so people should be, it's wonderful when people love whoever they love, that's wonderful. Okay. So if that's your standard, that people should be allowed to love who they love, and love is great and it's wonderful and we should just accept that, then, when your kid or grandkid or great-grandkid wants to marry a camel, you've got nothing to say. Now, you're thinking I'm exaggerating, and I probably am. I doubt it's going to be a camel, but believe me, this is going to come and it's going to be acceptable. And then how do you deal with incest, by the way? Because what if a mother falls in love with her son or a father his daughter? Is that okay? See, these are questions that we're not facing yet, but we will. And when we get there, you're going to be amazed to see how quickly people will roll over on this because they have no foundation, no biblical foundation. So I'm getting off the point. Sorry. The point is, in this culture that's rolling that direction, rolling downhill rapidly in terms of morality, there's a lot of pressure on those of us who will not move to move. And that pressure is only going to get more and more and more. It's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger because there's going to be fewer and fewer and fewer of us that won't move. And so, obviously, then the pressure becomes focused on you because you're the one. You know, this small group of people, if we could just get them out of the way or whatever. And that then can lead to bad things happening. We've seen that in the past in many different places. And Christians burning witches, for example, is a great example of that. Yeah, the Bible condemns witchcraft, but in the New Testament, no one's supposed to burn anyone. That's crazy to think that a New Testament Christian is going to burn people alive at the stake because they're Christians. That's nuts. But they did it. And that was because you had a small group of people you could really focus on and just kind of take all your angst out on. And it won't be too long before Bible-believing Christians are that group, or at least one of them, in this culture. So over the years that are coming now, we're going to have to face the fact that it's going to be harder and harder and harder to be a Christian in the West, in the United States, Europe, UK. So this top 50 countries where it's hardest to be a Christian, who knows how long it'll be, but someday we just might find our country on that list, and that will be a sad day. So that's the overview of what's going on in the world with our brothers and sisters in Christ, and guess what? It even includes us in a very small way, in a mild way, but in a rising way. The temperature is getting hotter, We're like the frog in the pot, right? Where you slowly turn the temperature up, and he adjusts to it, and he never jumps out until he's too late and he's boiled alive. Well, that's what's happening with Christians in our country and in the West in general. And it's going to be interesting to see how well we stand up to this. We'll see. But I wanted to bring you this information because it's really important, and because I know a lot of numbers need to be seen. That's why we're doing the video as well as the audio. I'm not going to do this every week, but let me know what you think about it, because I can certainly do it more often if you find the video helpful, which, would be great. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up right about now. I've got a few things, though, a few notes. First of all, I'm always open and looking for you to contact me and let me know what you'd like to hear, questions you have, thoughts, whatever. You can either leave a comment on the Facebook page, facebook.com/discipleup, or you can email me, Louie, Louie, @discipleup.org. You might want to check out my latest book, which I just published in January. It's called #4Parker. It's part of our spiritual growth campaign this year. #4Parker. I'm getting a lot of good feedback on the book. It's 55 short, 400 words. Most are a little under, a couple are a tiny bit over, but let's just say 400-word devotionals, 55 daily devotionals aimed at making you not only a stronger Christian, but a better witness. It's outreach evangelism oriented. No, it does not give you the plan for evangelism, but it just talks about things we need to get straight in our own lives in order to really reach out. And I'm getting some good feedback on it, which I really appreciate. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can go to Amazon.com. You can buy the physical copy for $7 or the ebook for $2.99. Yes, it's dirt cheap, people. Try to keep these things as cheap as I can. So get out there and buy one. Buy a couple. Give them to your friends. Give them to your relatives. Give them to your in-laws and your outlaws and your enemies. I don't care who you give them to. But let's use this maybe to make a little bit of difference. Don't forget my other books, Getting Real and Every Day in the Spirit. Every Day in the Spirit, a huge book covering the Holy Spirit. It's pretty exhaustive, and I think will answer most of your questions at any rate, so be sure and check that out. And be sure and tell your friends about the podcast. Please share this on your social media accounts. It means a lot to me and really helps out. And having said all that, it's time to go. So until next time, this is Louie saying God bless you. Thanks for watching. And remember that every time is a good time to disciple up. So long.
Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast, is written, produced, directed, in as much as there's any direction of this thing at all, edited every once in a while, and paid for by Louie. It's his personal ministry, and is not connected to Christ Church on the River. CCR does not sponsor, pay for, or necessarily approve the content found therein. The theme music for Disciple Up is Hot Wheels by Varensky. Yes, Louie actually paid for the rights to this very cool piece of music, so don't worry, and please call off the lawyers, as he's busy enough without having to deal with all that. All opinions expressed during Disciple Up are Louie's, and Louie's alone. They do not necessarily represent those of our sponsor, the Lord Jesus Christ. However, where the opinions, thoughts, impressions, and feelings shared are in line with God's Word, and faithfully represent what our Lord says in His holy word, the Bible, then they are representative of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you're wondering how the heck you're supposed to know this, remember, God tells you to test all things. Hold on to the truth. It's up to you to do the due diligence that God commands, so do it. Don't whine about it, and don't complain about how hard it is. Don't blame me for it. Disciple Up, and do what you know you're supposed to do. If you'd like to know more about Louie or Disciple Up, please go to discipleup.org and check out everything you find there. Or not, it's completely up to you. Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast will, God willing, publish an episode every week covering different areas of concern to disciples of Jesus. If that's important to you, then please subscribe on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, or another one of the many podcast aggregators available to you. If it's not, then don't. If you'd like to get in touch, please email Louie at louie@discipleup.org. God bless you.